Okay, sorry, I'll try that again. So we're going to be talking about the research strategy today. So there are four main sections to that. So we've got the significance, the innovation, the preliminary data, and the approach section. Once we've been through those, we're going to talk about common mistakes to avoid. And finally, just very briefly touch upon some other considerations and the other documents that you may or may not have to prepare. So I slide last week, but this is just a reminder about some of the sections you may or may not need to think about, depending on the technology or product that your company is developing. And again, I've mentioned this before, sorry for the broken record, but one of the first things you should do when you're preparing your grants is to gather a checklist of all these components, just so you're really clear on exactly what you need, because nasty surprises are never fun when you're down to the deadline with one of these proposals. So what is the research strategy? It really is the meat of your grant proposal. So as I just alluded to, it contains three named but four key sections: the significance section, the innovation, the preliminary data, and the approach. There's also your bibliography or references, but that does not count towards your page limitations. The page limit for these is 6 pages if you're in phase 1 and 12 pages if you're doing a fast track or a phase 2 proposal. So those four components, we're going to go through these one by one. So what is the significance section? So this is how the NIH describes it, and this is just copy and pasted directly from their website. So NIH says, you need to explain the importance of the problem or critical barrier to progress that the proposed project addresses. You should describe the scientific premise for the proposed project, including consideration of the strengths and weaknesses of published research or preliminary data crucial to support your application, and explain how the proposed project will improve scientific knowledge, technical capability, and/or clinical practice in one or more broad fields. So that's a lot of words. But what you really need to know and really need to understand is what the reviewers are looking for when they're reviewing your proposal. And we'll talk about the review process in a lot more detail next week, just to give you a heads up on that one. So to understand this, you really need to know the review criteria the reviewers use when they're scoring your proposal. So they grade this significant section on these specific items. So does your project address an important problem or critical barrier to progress in the field? If the aims of your project are achieved, how will scientific knowledge, technical capability, or clinical practice be improved? How will successful completion of the aims change the concepts, methods, technologies, treatments, services, or preventative interventions that drive the field? Does the proposed project have commercial potential to lead to a marketable product, process, or service? And in the case of a phase 2 or fast track proposal, does the commercialization plan demonstrate a high probability of commercialization? So I've discussed this a little bit over the last couple of weeks, and really the easiest way to make sure reviewers get this information is to go through the instructions, the omnibus solicitation, and literally copy and paste these terms they're looking for. So as an example, you could state the problem that you're trying to solve and say, use the words critical barrier to progress in the field. It makes it very easy for them, and we always want to make their lives as easy as possible, because then they'll be nicer to us. So literature searches are key when you're starting to work on your significance section. And where this really differs from academic grants is that your searches must not just be limited to PubMed and related sites. You should also look at patents, pending patents, clinical trials databases, as well as current medical sites such as Medscape, because they're the best ways of making sure that you get the most up-to-date information. Another key difference is really the type of information that you want to include. So with an SBIR, it's really important that you include statistics and numbers with citations to back them up. as an example, how prevalent is the disease or condition that you're targeting? What's the burden? So, and that can be financial, it can be morbidity, it can be mortality, it can be related to quality of life. You just really want to quantify in both numbers of people, dollar amounts, as much as you can, just because it really highlights the importance. Even if it's, say, an orphan disease or a relatively less prevalent condition, numbers still matter. And also don't be shy about including statistics or statements from experts in the field. So this is an example of what this might look like. Quite often you get opinion pieces, not opinion pieces so much, but more expert reviews where you have the large panels of people that are really gathering recommendations from medical societies. So you can include direct quotes from that with the reference. And again, it really enhances the validity of what you're doing. Other considerations in the significant section, like in an academic grant, you need to consider the rigor of the prior research. And that really pertains to both what you've done before and, more importantly, to work in the field. And also whether you're developing a drug, an app, a technology, or something else, what's the current gold standard or standard of care? So what are the issues with that? Why does it need to be improved? How is your proposed solution going to bridge this gap to potentially solve the unmet need? And again, these are words that you really want to use in your proposal. And a good way to end your proposal, the significant section of your proposal, and also to help you launch into the innovation, is to very clearly delineate your overall objectives, goals, and hypothesis. So once you've done that, the next section is going to be your innovation section. So here is how the NIH describes the innovation section. So you should explain how your application challenges and seeks to shift current research or clinical practice paradigms. You want to describe any novel theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, instrumentation or interventions to be developed or used, and any advantage over existing methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions. You should explain any refinements, improvements, or new applications of theoretical concepts, approaches, or methodologies, or interventions. So again, what do the reviewers really look for? It's quite similar to the NIH wording, really. So does the application challenge and seek to shift current research or clinical practice paradigms by utilizing the novel concepts? Are your concepts, approaches, or methods novel to one field of research or novel in a broad sense? Is a refinement, improvement, or new application of theoretical concepts, approaches, methodologies, instrumentation, or interventions proposed? So it's really important about these review criteria very closely, and make sure that you really understand how your approach or technology is innovative. And it may be innovative in a way that you're not even thinking about, because innovation can cover quite a broad range of concepts. So again, it can be conceptual, it can be technological, it could be methodological, or it could be a completely new type of intervention. So if you aren't really sure whether reviewers will consider what you're doing innovative, or you're not sure how to best communicate that, I do encourage you all to reach out to the program officer. Again, don't forget that they really are there to help you. So, they can help advise you on how best to present your innovation so that reviewers really grasp what you're doing and the importance of it. So after the innovation section, you will want to include preliminary data. So the NIH guidelines for this say that preliminary data can be an essential part of a research grant application and can help establish the likelihood of success of the proposed project. Early stage investigators should include preliminary data. They do say that preliminary data are not required for phase 1 applications, However, such results may assist reviewers in assessing the likelihood of success of the proposed project and may be included in the research strategy attachment. So this is where I'm going to completely diverge from what the NIH says. So regardless of what they list, and even allowing for the fact that phase 1 of an SBIR is proof of concept, you should always include preliminary data. And in fact, it can make or break your proposal. So you should include it to enhance your chance of success, but you do need to make sure that the data that you include are useful. For example, if you're proposing a completely new technology or approach, you would want to include a little bit of preliminary data just to reassure reviewers that what you're doing is feasible and not just completely out there. So, you know, they have to believe that you can actually do what you're saying that you can do. So when you're including the preliminary data, there are really 2 general approaches that people use for this. Some people like to have a single preliminary data section at the beginning of the approach, while others like to break it down into the aims. So with a lot of things like with these applications, there's no strict right or wrong way of doing this. That being said, my personal preference is to include a figure, at least a figure within each aim if you can. And this can be in addition to figures or a figure at the beginning of the approach section. And the reason for that is it allows you to really force home to the reviewers the specifics of what you're proposing in that actual aim, particularly if it's something new, because if you're proposing quite a technical grant, and you have all your figures before, say, aim 1, they may have forgotten something that you really want them to remember by the time they get to, say, aim 2 or 3. So it just helps them stay focused on that. And also, it really just breaks up the text. But again, that's my personal preference. And the approach, that type of approach may not work for all types of proposals. So you'll have to customize that depending on what you're doing. So the final section of the research strategy is the approach. And again, this is what the NIH guidelines state for this section. They want you to describe the overall strategy, methodology, and analyses to be used to accomplish the specific aims of the project. They want you to describe the experimental design and methods proposed and how they will achieve robust and unbiased results. Unless you address it separately in a resource sharing plan, include how the data will be analyzed, collected, and interpreted, as well as any resource sharing plans as appropriate. And as an aside, if you can fit any of that into your research sharing plan, that will give you more space to use in the research strategy. You want to discuss alternative strategies and benchmarks for success. And if it's an early stage project, you need to describe any strategy that you have to establish feasibility and to address the management of any high risk aspects of your proposed work. So again, what do reviewers look for in this? Are your overall strategy, method, and analyses well reasoned and appropriate to accomplish the specific aims of the project? Are your potential problems, alternative strategies, and benchmarks for success presented? If it's an early stage project, will the strategy establish feasibility and will particularly risky aspects be managed? So the best way to help reviewers find the information that they need to score you on this is to really use clear formatting, and I always recommend using subheadings for all this. So when I'm writing an approach section for one of my clients, I have a series of subheadings that I would pretty much always use. So I would always start with a rationale and objective. Quite clearly, that's explaining why you're doing the aim and what you're hoping to achieve in it. I would then have a feasibility preliminary data figure. I would then go into the experimental design and again use subheadings to further break it down. When you're doing your experimental design, you generally don't need to go into a lot of detail, particularly if methods are published. You can just refer to previous publications about that. You're then going to want to look at your statistical considerations and scientific rigor. With that section, though, I should add that you need to include some variation of that section somewhere in the proposal. Where it makes sense to have it, and by that I mean, do you need one section in each aim, or is one section at the end of the proposal sufficient? That really does depend on the nature of your proposal. So if you have aims that are very different and that will involve completely different unique styles of analyses, then it would make sense to have a statistical consideration section within each aim. Whereas if your statistics might be similar, it would make more sense and certainly conserve you space if you could just have one section at the end. Once you've done that, you want to look at your expected outcomes. So this comes back to your milestones, your markers of success. So what do you hope to achieve with each aim? And really, really important is the potential pitfalls and alternative approaches. This section is critical to show the reviewers that you're aware of what could go wrong. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, this is particularly important for high-risk aspects of your proposal. So it's not just what could go wrong, it's also something that you say do not anticipate might happen. You just need to show that you have contingency plans in place to deal with various scenarios, because to some extent that really de-risks the project. So once you've described your aims, you want to end your phase 1 proposal with a brief paragraph on what you would do in phase 2 after successful completion of phase 1. And this section could also include your longer term goals. So while a commercialization plan is only required once you reach phase 2 or for a fast track proposal, an important aspect of phase 1 is to show commercialization potential. So what do I mean by that? I really mean that what you have is a marketable product that there's a need for, that there's a market for, and this ties back to the significance section and why it's so important that you include numbers for as many things as you can. The next thing that's really important are your letters of support. I can't emphasize how important it is, though, that these are impactful. They should be written specifically for the grant and for you. Reviewers can spot a boilerplate copy and paste letter from a mile away, and if you have any like that, it really will hurt you rather than help you. It's very, very important that you start this process early, particularly because most of the people you're going to be getting letters of support from are going to be quite big hitters within your area, whether they are, for example, a pharma executive that works in the oncology space that is confirming the unmet medical need and their excitement for your technology and how it could improve patient care. That's a very standard letter that is always a very, very good idea to include if you can. But these people are busy, so it can take a couple of weeks until they even respond to your email requesting a letter. You're generally going to be writing these letters of support yourself. While in an ideal world, the people that is going to be signing them would write them, that very, very rarely, if ever, happens. So you need to be prepared to write these yourself, send them to the person that you want to sign them, and ask them to put it on their letterhead and sign it and send you back a PDF. Even better is if you can get the contact information of their admin support team, because they will generally, once the person that you want to sign it gives their approval, they will take care of it for you. They will have their electronic signature and they will just send you the PDF. So that can be an easy and important way to expedite these things. The other really important consideration for all this is your biosketches. So biosketches, like with an academic grant, they are required for all key personnel. Again, make sure that they're personalized. It is common, particularly for more senior people that work in academia, for them just to have a single biosketch that they don't modify from one grant to the next. So they don't update their personal statement. This is a big, big, big mistake. It should be written with relevance to your current proposal or with the technology, and describe how that individual specifically can help with or has the experience for your project and for your technology. Another use for the personal statements in these is you could, for example, use it to explain a potential anomaly in your background. So just a shorter than usual postdoc period that was questioned with some of his early grants that he was submitting. So his postdoc period was shorter than usual in the US. And the reason for this was actually because he had to return home to his native country to care for his mother, who had been diagnosed with cancer. So when he got there, he got a faculty position, but his biosketch looked somewhat strange because he only had an 18-month postdoc on there. So when he came to work with me last year, we reworked his biosketch to really explain why that happened. And since we did that, it's not been questioned. So, reviewers do read it, and some spend quite a lot of time on the personal statement. So don't underestimate the importance of it. The other consideration with these biosketches, and particularly if you're concerned that people don't update them, is to make sure that the template that the biosketches are on is the current version. So even though what used to be previous section D, which was about funding, was removed quite some time ago from the templates, it's really common to still receive biosketches that contain that. So make sure that the templates are all correct, because having incorrect or out-of-date documents honestly just does not look good to reviewers, and it shows poor attention to detail. So now I prepared just a few tips for you, really just to try and help you avoid common mistakes that we see frequently. And this is particularly from people who are less experienced preparing these SBIRs. So I mentioned this last week, but you really need to highlight your value proposition. And this is a common mistake people make. So what's the value of what you're proposing, medically, financially, on quality of life, outcomes, whatever you can think of. But the flip side of that is don't overstate your claims of significance. So, if you're, say, developing an oncology drug, to state on page 1 of your proposal that you're going to save millions of lives with this one thing immediately is obviously not really in touch with reality. So you want to sell yourself, but be realistic as well. I mentioned this earlier, but a perceived lack of innovation. So you need to separate what you're doing from competing products and services. Make sure that your approach section is very clear. Sometimes these sections can waffle around a lot. The terminology I always like to use for these is, if at all possible, spoon feed the reviewers. So make it very, very easy for them to find what they need. Use the words that they're looking for, use the words that they have to review on. Don't repeat things ad nauseum, but if there's a really key point, it's okay to say it in a couple of different places, and also use formatting to highlight those things. Don't rush. Allow yourself plenty of time to hit the deadline. I had somebody reach out to me last week who wanted to submit a grant for the April 5th deadline. Bad idea, because you can tell if it's rushed, and you're not going to prepare a competitive proposal in such a short time frame. So allow yourself enough time. Ideally, you would want at least 2, if not 3 months for a phase 1, and more really if you're going to do a phase 2 or fast track that needs the commercialization plan as well. Make sure that you have enough but not too much in your phase 1 goals. Remember, this is either a 6-month or a 1-year project. So make sure that what you're proposing is achievable in that time frame. Again, don't rush to meet the deadline. Make sure that you're understanding your audience as well. So the issue with this is you don't actually know who's going to be reviewing your proposal. So this is why we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but this is why it's so important to try and target your proposal to the correct study section. So if your proposal is going to be reviewed, for example, if you're, say, developing a machine learning technique, if your proposal is going to experts in that type of technology, they're going to have a very different understanding from what they would if it was, say, going to an oncology panel who maybe know a little bit about machine learning, but not the ins and outs of it. So you need to have a clear understanding of where it's going so that you include enough information for them to understand, but that you're not dumbing it down if they are experts in that area. So that's really important. Again, we've talked about this before, but make sure you have sufficient expertise on your team. So if you are, for example, a team of engineers developing a product designed to treat a clinical area, you will need a clinician related to that clinical area on your team. Whether it's just as a consultant or as a co-investigator, you want that person, you want to be able to include their biosketch because it shows that you have the expertise needed to guide the clinical decisions or the impact clinical decision making down the line. As I said, you need to include preliminary studies or data. You also need to understand that you are competing with other people for this money. So understand your competition. It's quite likely they could be very experienced writing these. They could have several SBIR awards before. So lack of experience with SBIRs and with small businesses is a negative that will impact your score. So this is, again, why you need to have collaborators and consultants working with you and use those to your advantage. So just briefly, we will just talk about some of the other supporting documents. So in addition to the specific aims, the project summary, narrative, and research strategy, there are a whole host of other documents that you may or may not need to prepare depending on the nature of your technology and aims. And as I mentioned earlier, know what you need to prepare ahead of time by gathering your checklist together when you first start writing this. So if your work involves human subjects, the documents that you may have to prepare for this can be incredibly time consuming. And I've inserted this link here. You'll all get the PDF of this just to make it easy for you to find this. And what you would need to prepare for this very much depends on whether the NIH considers what you're doing a clinical trial or human subjects research. It's a nuance, but it's a very, very important one. If you're doing a clinical trial, you have to assume that you're going to be spending a lot of hours preparing these documents. So the details that the NIH provides here are actually very, very detailed, but they're also a little complicated. So you want to read those very, very carefully and reach out to the program officer if you have any questions. The vertebrate animals, if you're doing any studies involving any type of animal, the requirements are essentially the same as they would be for an academic grant. You basically have to justify the need for animals and explain how you'll minimize pain and suffering and the usual type of stuff. Facilities and resources is often an underused document. Don't forget that people can be considered resources. So don't be afraid to use this to highlight the importance of specific people on your team and or partnerships, particularly if you don't have the space to highlight those things in the research strategy, or if you're unsure if the personal statements do a good enough job. There's no page limit for this, so you use the space to your advantage. Equipment, same as any other grants. Commercialization plan. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a couple of weeks when we're talking about preparing for phase 2. If this is a resubmitted application, you have to do a one-page introduction like you would with an academic grant. And I won't go into all of these, but I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any. And then finally, you have your budget and the budget justification. So this is the only section I've actually prepared any slides on. So always check the solicitation for the current budgets. Very, very general guidelines. Phase 1 is around 150,000 for 6 to 12 months. Phase 2 is about $1 million for 2 years. These numbers may actually be slightly out of date now. But be aware if you qualify as a special topic that may allow you to exceed the budget cap, and there is one of these for pretty much all of the institutes, talk to the program officer and get approval in writing. So you'll know if you qualify or not based on the information on the NIH website, but you always want to get approval from the program officer. And as I mentioned, make sure that's in writing just in case you get some later on. With a budget, a really important thing to include for your own benefit is they allow you to add on a profit fee of 7% into the budget. So make sure that you do that because it's basically free money. this is just a little, this is what the budget caps are like. Just an example of, you can increase it, say, to 225,000 for phase 1 and 1.5 million for phase 2 if you qualify for a budget waiver topic. So definitely check that, because it is a significant change in the amount of budget that you can ask for. So again, it does depend on these specific institutes as well. So look at the solicitation. Finally, just the one last thing I want to highlight for you is key personnel in the SBIR. And we've touched about this on this several times, but having a strong team around you is central to the success of an SBIR program. So having more people who've key personnel, even if you're not requesting salary support for them, it can be very useful because it allows you to include their bio sketches. So this is just an example of different roles that you may have when you're including people on your grants. So having a big team is good as long as everyone's there for a reason. So don't start including people who are not having a direct role in it, but do include somebody to cover everything that you feel is important to have covered on your team.